Hi, I'm Maura. When I attended my sister's wedding, my mom sat me outside the hall, away from everyone else, like a forgotten afterthought. I watched the celebration unfold from the shadows, realizing I was never really part of their story. Why would a family push one of their own so far out without a second thought? What time are you tuning in, and where are you watching from? Drop a comment below. I'd love to hear your story too. When I attended my sister's wedding, my mom sat me outside the hall. Houston in late October felt like it was holding its breath, the crisp air brushing past the marble pillars of the grand ballroom. The golden light of the setting sun stretched long shadows across the parking lot as I tightened my coat around myself and climbed the steps alone. Inside, the venue buzzed with laughter and clinking glasses. Women in satin dresses clustered near the entrance, men in sharp suits adjusting their ties, everyone radiating a polished kind of excitement. I paused at the welcome table, offered a polite smile to the girl managing the seating cards, and searched for my name. It wasn't where it should have been. A frown tugged at my lips. I scanned the list again, slower this time. The staff member leaned in, her voice overly bright. "Oh, you're with the additional seating," she said, hesitating just long enough to make my stomach clench. She led me down a side hallway, far from the glittering chandeliers and manicured photo booths. The light here was dimmer, the floral arrangements sparse. I caught a whiff of mothballs from the coat check nearby. My seat was a lonely table shoved awkwardly against the wall. It was the kind of spot you assigned to distant cousins you barely remembered or co-workers you invited out of obligation. I sat down heavily, clutching my clutch bag tighter. Through the open double doors, I could see the main hall. My family, my sister, my mother, all laughing together at their places of honor. They didn't look my way. They didn't even seem to notice. A sharp contrast burned in my mind. Their warm, golden circle, and me, exiled to the edge like I carried something contagious. I thought back to birthdays spent at the kids' table, long after I'd grown taller than everyone else. To family vacations where I slept on fold-out couches while my sister got the guest suite. This wasn't new. It was just final now. I caught sight of my mother bustling past the doorway. Jolene, radiant in her designer gown, beamed beside her. Summoning every ounce of courage, I approached. "Mom," I said, keeping my voice steady, "why am I sitting out here?" She blinked, then gave a quick, dismissive smile. "There just wasn't enough space at the main tables, sweetheart. You're not married yet. It's easier this way." It landed like a slap. I nodded once, short, sharp, and retreated without another word. My legs felt heavier with each step back to my lonely table. Maybe I had spent too long trying to squeeze myself into a place that had long ago stopped being mine. I sat there, back straight, hands folded neatly in my lap, staring at the festivities as if through a thick pane of glass. The laughter was muffled now, the music tinny and distant. Every clink of a champagne glass felt like a nail hammered deeper into the coffin of my illusions. And then, the grand entrance music swelled. Jolene and her new husband swept through the main doors, all dazzling smiles and camera flashes. Everyone inside rose in applause, a sea of shining faces turned toward them. I stayed seated, alone, forgotten. I watched, and I knew with bone-deep certainty this would be the last time I ever begged to be seen. A cold breath escaped my lips, steady and sure, carrying with it the last fragile hope I had clung to for far too long. A guest among strangers. I sat there for a long time, my hands smoothing over the creases of my skirt again and again, trying to pretend that the seat didn't feel like a punishment. Maybe I was making too much of it. Maybe they had simply run out of space. Maybe I was imagining things, stretching tiny slights into towering betrayals. But as I glanced toward the entrance of the grand ballroom, watching other guests being ushered in with warm smiles and easy laughter, my heart told a different story. Their names were called out. They were guided to decorated tables, plates already set, champagne flutes sparkling under the golden lights. Every welcome was a celebration. Every seat was a testament to belonging. And then there was me. When I finally dared to really look at the chair I had been given, the sting deepened. A piece of masking tape was awkwardly stuck to the backrest, and on it, scrawled in hurried handwriting, "Extra guest." It wasn't just that I was seated outside, it was that someone who knew, had made sure I would feel it every second. The label clung to the chair like an accusation, and the weight of it pressed down on my chest until breathing felt like a task. My fingers brushed the tape, half expecting it to burn my skin. I was not family. I was overflow, a name they remembered too late. Something inside me slumped. Something else started to curl tighter and tighter. The scent of lilies drifted from the ballroom. Faint strains of a violin floated into the hallway. I should have gotten up and left. Instead, I stayed rooted to that chair, a ghost sitting among the living. My mind wandered backward without asking. Senior year of high school, my graduation dinner. The restaurant had been bustling, my family buzzing with pride for Jolene's early admission to college. And me? My seat had been bumped last minute to a folding chair by the kitchen doors to make room for my aunt's surprise date. I told myself it didn't matter. I told myself again now. A low, bitter smile touched my lips as I reached for my purse. My fingers brushed something inside and I pulled it out. The wedding invitation. I hadn't even realized I had brought it. It was thinner than the others I'd glimpsed earlier. Cheaper cardstock, slightly off color. My thumb traced the edges, noting how the ink bled just a little at the corners. My middle name was misspelled. The zip code was wrong. And suddenly, I remembered. It had arrived nearly 2 weeks after my mother first mentioned the wedding date. Not a mistake, a placeholder. They hadn't forgotten me. They had added me in, because it would have looked bad not to. Laughter burst from the ballroom, rich and full, and it scraped against the inside of my ribs. I slid the invitation back into my purse with slow, careful movements, as if it might shatter. I sat back in my chair, letting the cool air of the hallway settle around me. Would they have made so many mistakes if they had truly wanted me there? Would they have? The question settled into my bones, heavy and cold. I pulled out my phone, almost without thinking, scanning the screen. No messages, no missed calls, no, "Where are you?" The truth clicked into place with an awful, effortless finality. I wasn't forgotten. I was deliberately left out. My fingers curled into fists on my lap, and for the first time that night it wasn't sadness that filled my chest. It was something harder, sharper, something that wouldn't break as easily. Erased from the memories. I sat stiffly in the hard chair, my hands resting motionless in my lap. The muted sounds of clinking glasses and laughter floated down the hallway, as unreachable as the stars outside the grand windows. Every breath I took felt shallow, tight against my ribs. Maybe they didn't mean it, part of me whispered, still desperate to believe. Maybe it was just a mistake. But another, louder voice, one I could no longer ignore, answered back. They wrote you out long ago. Tonight they made it official. My fingers moved almost on their own, digging through my purse until they found the wedding invitation. I pulled it out slowly, like peeling back a bandage I already knew would sting. The details snapped into sharp focus under the dim hallway light. The cardstock was thinner than the ones I'd seen earlier on other tables. The logo at the top, a scripted J and K, was slightly smudged, misaligned. I flipped the envelope over. The address was wrong, the zip code a town over from where I lived. A careless error maybe, or maybe not careless at all, not even an oversight, a deliberate downgrade. A hollow feeling opened up inside me, wide and raw. My mouth tasted like copper. I gripped the invitation tighter until the edges bent under my fingers. I leaned back against the wall, closing my eyes for just a moment, letting the memories crash into me. Family vacations, the worst room, the pull-out couch while Jolene had a canopy bed, the last slice of cake given to a neighbor's kid before it ever made its way to me, the Christmas where my birthday present was forgotten entirely until I asked about it. It had never been about space. It had never been about forgetfulness. It had always been about how easily they could put me aside. A flicker of movement caught my eye, pulling me back to the present. Across the entryway, just past the coat racks and floral centerpieces, a large screen was set up, playing a family slideshow. I stayed where I was, watching. Photos flickered in slow motion, Jolene blowing out birthday candles, Dad hugging Jolene at her graduation, Mom adjusting Jolene's veil during the rehearsal dinner, family trips, smiling faces at Thanksgiving dinners, slide after slide, image after image. I waited for my face to appear, for some small proof that I had been there too, that I had mattered. It never came. I wasn't forgotten. I was erased. The finality of it hit harder than any shove or scream could have. I pressed my lips together until they stopped trembling, my gaze locked on the bright, joyful faces that had no room left for me. Maybe they had never had room to begin with. The slideshow faded to black, the projector humming quietly before looping back to the beginning. I turned my head away. My body felt too heavy for my bones. My heart felt like something crumpled inside my chest. They didn't lose me by accident. They let me go on purpose. I stayed seated for another long moment, letting that truth settle, rooting itself into the hollow spaces they had carved out over the years. I wasn't crying. I wasn't shaking. I was empty. And in that emptiness, something new stirred. Colder, steadier. I stood slowly, knees stiff from sitting too long. I didn't glance toward the ballroom. I didn't look back at the flashing images where my life had been carefully edited out. My fists curled at my sides, not from sorrow this time, but from something sharper. If I'm invisible to them, maybe it's time I disappear for good. The weight of their words. I sat there, the thin strap of my purse twisted tight around my fingers, as if the leather could anchor me to something solid. Around me, the muted sounds of the celebration inside ebbed and flowed, a tide I was no longer part of. Every breath felt shallow, like breathing through gauze, my chest tightening with each new realization that unfolded inside me. This wasn't an oversight. It wasn't a misunderstanding. It was who I was to them, who I had always been. They didn't forget me. They didn't neglect me. They chose to place me here, just out of sight, just out of reach, where I couldn't ruin the perfect family picture. A hollow kind of clarity settled into my bones as I shifted in my seat, glancing toward the main hall, almost against my will. Through the doorway, the family slideshow had started on the projector screen. Images flickered across the white linen backdrop. Jolene's sweet 16, Mom and Dad's anniversary party, countless Christmas mornings and beach vacations. Everyone laughing, arms around each other, faces glowing with pride and belonging. Everyone but me. I searched every frame automatically, heart tightening with every absence. And then, there it was. A single photo where I appeared. The colors around me were vibrant, Jolene's dress a brilliant red, Dad's blazer crisp and navy. But my image, my face, was dulled. The lighting warped, my figure muted, as if someone had taken an eraser to the brightness that belonged to me. A ghost among the living. The quiet devastation hit so deep it didn't even sting. It simply hollowed me out, left me sitting there like a shell. They wanted me invisible, I thought, numb, and now they made it literal. I sank further into the chair, my body heavy with memories that I couldn't outrun. Flashes from childhood burst against my mind. The school awards ceremony where they spelled my name wrong on the program. The newsletter where my picture was missing entirely. Mom's dismissive shrug. It's not that big a deal. It was always that shrug that hurt the most. Not anger, not disappointment, indifference. I felt the familiar slicing sting of it now as I shifted in my chair, shrinking into the shadows they had carved out for me. A voice caught my attention. My mother's. I froze. She stood a few feet away, speaking to a cluster of relatives. Her voice was light, almost amused, like she was sharing an inside joke. You know how Maura is, always making things harder than they need to be. No venom, no malice, just that casual, weary pity that cut deeper than any knife. I turned my face away, staring at the polished floor, my pulse hammering against my ribs. My heart felt too large for my chest, full of something raw and ugly. Betrayal sharpened inside me, slicing through the last tender thread I had clung to all night. Maybe I wasn't forgotten. Maybe I wasn't invisible. Maybe they saw me perfectly clearly, and simply decided I wasn't worth the trouble. A wave of emotion surged through me. Grief, rage, resignation. But under it all, a cold seed planted itself deep in my gut. They don't deserve the power to define me anymore. The thought was so stark, so foreign, it startled me. But once I heard it, I couldn't unhear it. I wrapped the strap of my purse tighter around my hand, a small, defiant gesture that steadied me. Slowly, deliberately, I rose from my chair. My knees ached from sitting so long. My throat felt tight. But my spine was straight. I didn't know yet what I would do, but I knew one thing for certain. I would not remain silent much longer. No longer the quiet one. The clipboard in my lap felt heavier than it should have. I sat there breathing shallowly, the fake smiles and half-laughed conversations around me folding into a blurry buzz. The hallway lights flickered slightly, casting long, distorted shadows across the floor. It all felt warped, just like tonight. A picture deliberately blurred at the edges so no one would have to see me clearly. If I let them minimize me again tonight, it would be because I stayed silent. The thought rooted itself deep, solid, and unmovable. I was done shrinking into the corners they left for me. Across the hall, laughter erupted from a group of older guests sipping champagne. I recognized my mother's voice floating among them, familiar, lilting, dangerous in its casual cruelty. "Oh, Maura," she said, chuckling lightly. "You know, she's always been difficult." No bitterness, no anger, just a tired, dismissive pity, tossed around like gossip about a weathered piece of furniture no one wanted to throw away, but couldn't proudly display either. I sat there, frozen, letting the words coat my skin like oil. This wasn't the first time tonight I had heard her frame me that way. It wouldn't be the last. It was never just one comment. It was a chorus, softly orchestrated over years, until even I started humming along. I clenched my hands together in my lap, knuckles whitening. Somewhere deep inside, a part of me crumbled, but another part, the part that had sat through enough forgotten birthdays and cold dinners, hardened. This was not new. I thought back to the family reunion the summer after my senior year of high school. I had walked in last, behind Jolene and her new boyfriend. Mom had introduced everyone proudly, listing accomplishments like badges of honor. Except me. For me, just a brief glance, a nod, and the way she quickly moved on, as if my presence needed no explanation, because it barely registered at all. Back then, I had told myself it was an accident. Tonight, I knew better. The scuff of approaching heels pulled me out of the memory. My mother again, this time walking toward me briskly, clipboard in hand. "Would you mind keeping an eye on the gift table?" she asked, tone sweet, almost apologetic. But her eyes had already moved past me, scanning the room for someone more important. I forced a polite smile and nodded. She didn't wait for an answer. I stared down at the clipboard she placed in my hands, the ridiculousness of it sinking in fully now. I wasn't a guest. I was security. The humiliation pressed down harder than the cheap metal clip biting into my fingers. They didn't trust me to stand beside them. They only trusted me to stand guard. The band inside shifted songs, and guests began making their way toward the dance floor. Laughter, music, the clinking of glass, a symphony I was barred from, consigned to the outer circle like a servant at a feast. I sat there, a statue of compliance, but inside, something cracked. No more appeasing, no more swallowing it down and smiling. If they insisted on assigning me a role tonight, maybe I would finally choose one for myself, one they wouldn't see coming. My hand tightened around the clipboard until the cheap plastic groaned in protest. Slowly, I lifted my gaze, sweeping across the glamorous hall, the oblivious faces, the laughing mouths that could so easily dismiss me. A whisper stirred at the edge of my mind, sharp and sure. Tonight I will not leave quietly. The smile cracks. The clipboard sat like a weight in my hands as I returned to the gift table, each step heavier than the last. From here, I could hear the band shift into another lively tune, laughter carrying through the grand hall like a current I had no place in. I tightened my grip on the board, the edge digging a faint line into my palm. It had always been a small thing, a favor here, a task there, asked so sweetly, so effortlessly, as if my compliance was a foregone conclusion. Individually, none of it seemed like much, but tonight, the chains they formed rattled with every forced smile I gave. I was useful, not celebrated, not loved. Useful. That was all. The realization didn't come like a crashing wave. It seeped in, slow and relentless, soaking through the last shreds of denial I had tried to cling to. Lorraine's voice sliced through my thoughts, light and casual. "Oh, one more thing, Maura," she said as she bustled past, not even pausing fully. "Please make sure no one mixes up the cards and gifts, will you? It would be such a mess to sort later." I stared at her retreating back, the clipboard growing heavier in my arms. I wasn't a guest. I wasn't family. I was the hired help they didn't have to pay. The sharp, chilling feeling settled deeper into my bones, colder than the Texas autumn air leaking through the nearby doors. I forced a smile at the next guest who dropped off a package. The act felt foreign now, the muscles in my face rebelling. In the corner of my vision, the slideshow flickered on a loop again. Their memories, not mine. A Christmas when I was 10 came flooding back unbidden. The tree had been surrounded by a sea of brightly wrapped gifts. Jolene had squealed, tearing through each one with gleeful abandon, her face lighting up at every reveal. I had spent most of the morning picking up discarded ribbons and torn paper, clearing space as the adults praised Jolene's manners, her joy, her beauty. My gifts had been fewer, an afterthought. And when it came time to clean, it was me they called. Not Jolene. Never Jolene. They never saw what I gave. Only how quietly I gave it. I blinked back into the present as a new figure approached, the kind of approach that made the air change before words were even spoken. Dorothy Crane. Her smile dripped sugar as she stopped beside me, glancing meaningfully at the clipboard. "It's so noble of you to stay out here, dear," she said, voice syrupy and sharp all at once. "Some people just know their place, don't they?" The nearby guests tittered politely, pretending not to hear, but their eyes said otherwise. My face flushed hot and then cold, and then hot again. I wanted to throw the clipboard across the room. I wanted to scream. I wanted to vanish. But I did none of those things. I stood still. I smiled tighter. And inside, something hard and immovable clicked into place. No more. No more polite nods. No more forced grins. No more silent acceptance. They could laugh. They could dismiss. They could try to erase me, but I would not be invisible again. I straightened my back, the weight in my chest no longer a burden but a foundation. My eyes swept the glamorous hall, the polished floor, the glittering chandeliers, the faces frozen in curated happiness. If they won't give me a place, I will claim my own. Laughter that cut deeper. I moved farther into the hall, the clipboard forgotten in my hand, my heart pounding not from fear but from something hotter, sharper. I was ready to reclaim some small piece of space, to exist without apology for once tonight. The laughter quieted as I crossed the threshold. A few heads turned. Conversations stumbled to an awkward halt. For a moment, the clink of glasses and silverware seemed louder than the music. I caught Dorothy Crane's gaze as she stood among a knot of guests, her champagne flute tilted lazily in her hand. Her smirk was unmistakable, as if she had been waiting for this exact moment. She didn't miss a beat. "Some people," she said, voice light and carrying effortlessly over the soft music, "just can't stand being irrelevant." A ripple of chuckles followed, poorly masked behind napkins and wine glasses. Eyes slid toward me, some apologetic, some gleeful, most simply relieved it wasn't them on the receiving end. I stood still, the heat rising to my cheeks. The entire room seemed to tilt sideways, and for a moment I wasn't 34 years old, a grown woman with a life and job and dignity. I was 15 again, standing under the harsh gymnasium lights after the high school talent show, listening to my mother tell an aunt loudly enough for me to hear, well, at least she tried. Always undermined, always laughed at. Not because I failed, because they needed someone to be smaller than themselves. The clipboard trembled slightly in my hand, the plastic edge biting into my palm. But I stayed rooted to the floor, breathing shallowly, willing the sting in my eyes to subside. From across the room, Jolene caught my eye. Her smile was the worst part, gleaming, sugary, a little too tight at the edges. It was the smile you gave someone you pitied, or someone you had already decided to leave behind. Later, as the night bled on, I caught snatches of conversations floating through the air. "She's making things so awkward," one cousin whispered. "I mean, if she didn't want to come, why didn't she just stay home?" Another murmured. Jolene's fingerprints were all over it. The subtle suggestions, the carefully placed doubts. She was skilled at planting seeds, knowing they would grow into judgments long after she walked away. I knew the pattern well by now. The rage that bloomed inside me wasn't hot and frantic. It was slow, dense, and terrifyingly clear. They wanted me to believe I was the problem. They wanted me to be the scapegoat, the source of every awkward glance, every strained laugh. And for years I had played along, shrinking myself smaller and smaller, trying to fit into the space they grudgingly offered. No more. Tonight, the choice stood clear before me, stark and shining like a road splitting in two. I could stay silent, stay compliant, stay small, or I could stand up and say, enough. I exhaled slowly, steadying my hands against the inevitable tremor of adrenaline building inside. My heart hammered, not from fear anymore, but from readiness. They want to make me small, I thought, my fists tightening at my sides. They forgot who I grew up to be. The last straw. I leaned against the cool wall just outside the main hall, the noise from inside blending into a shapeless hum. My hands trembled slightly as I unlocked my phone, pretending I was checking the time, pretending I wasn't trying to anchor myself with something, anything solid. A notification blinked on the screen. Family group chat. My chest tightened. I opened it against my better judgment. There it was. Jolene's thinly veiled dig, posted like a banner for everyone to see. Some people can't stand not being the center of attention. Sad. No name. No need. Every person in that group knew exactly who she meant. Heat rose in my cheeks, prickling, sharp. It wasn't the words themselves. It was the smirking validation underneath them. The casual cruelty cloaked as passive aggression. Around me, I felt it ripple. Glances slid in my direction. Whispers brushed the air like knives. I wasn't just on the outside anymore. I was being paraded as the villain in a story I hadn't even agreed to be part of. I dropped my phone back into my purse, the metal clasp snapping shut too loudly. My heart hammered, not with fear this time, but with a rage so old and deep it felt almost sacred. It wasn't the first time Jolene had stolen my moment. A memory unspooled, unbidden. A family barbecue years ago, the day I'd announced getting into my dream college. I had waited for the right moment, rehearsed my words 100 times, and Jolene? She had stood up just after I spoke, twirling the diamond promise ring her boyfriend had just given her. By the end of the night, no one remembered my news. Only her ring. History didn't repeat itself, it escalated. The door to the hall creaked slightly, and I turned to see my mother stepping out, smoothing the front of her dress with one hand, her smile already in place. "Please," she said softly, catching my arm, "don't make a scene. This is Jolene's day." Her tone was low, soothing, as if she were speaking to a wild animal she hoped to coax back into its cage. It wasn't a request, it was a warning. I stared at her, feeling the distance between us stretch wider than the hallway, wider than the years I had spent trying to prove myself worthy. I didn't answer. She patted my hand briskly, not waiting for my response, then disappeared back into the glitter and laughter inside. A vibration buzzed against my hip. Another message. From her. "If you can't control yourself, it might be best to leave quietly." The words seared into me, colder than any shouted accusation. It was never about protecting me. It was about protecting their perfect image, even if it meant erasing me entirely. I set my phone down carefully on the small table next to the gift logbook, my fingers steady now in a way that felt almost foreign. Through the glass doors, the wedding spun on. Champagne flowing, heels clicking, flashes popping like tiny fireworks. A celebration I was never truly invited to. For a long moment, I just stood there, breathing in the cool night air sneaking through the cracked doors. And then, with a calmness that startled even me, I whispered, "No, I won't leave quietly, not this time." The resolution, moving beyond the past. I stood behind the glass doors, watching the celebration unfold one last time. My breath was steady, deep, the cold seeping into my skin not as an enemy, but as a quiet companion. Inside the ballroom, they toasted and danced, Faces I once longed to impress illuminated under the crystal chandeliers. None of them turned toward the door. None of them noticed my absence. And somehow, it didn't hurt anymore. I had already left them long before tonight. Without a backward glance, I turned away from the warm hum of laughter and light, stepping into the crisp Houston night. The air wrapped around me like a balm, clean and sharp, carrying the faint scent of cedar from the parking lot trees. No goodbyes, no dramatic confrontations, just the soft sound of my heels against the stone steps as I walked down, one sure step at a time. A flash of memory brushed against me, all the years spent trying to carve out space at their tables, to earn my place with good grades, with politeness, with shrinking myself smaller and smaller. None of it had ever been enough, and it never would be. I reached my car, the metal cold under my fingers, and paused with the door half open. In the reflection of the window, I caught my own gaze. Tired, yes, but clear in a way it hadn't been for years. The loneliness I carried wasn't a wound anymore. It was a badge, a testament to surviving a battlefield where love was conditional, and acceptance came with strings too tangled to ever unwind. Driving through the quiet streets, I let the city blur past me. For the first time in a long while, I wasn't rushing anywhere. I wasn't chasing anything. I was simply leaving. Childhood memories floated up, softer now, less jagged. Sitting alone in the backyard under the oak tree when no one called me in for cake. Reading quietly by the window while birthday parties roared on inside. Not abandonment, survival. I had been building my own refuge long before I realized I needed one. And tonight, I wasn't losing a family. I was reclaiming myself. The days that followed were quieter than I expected. A handful of texts came in, clipped, defensive, blaming. I read them all without anger, without the aching need to explain myself. I didn't respond. I blocked the family group chat without ceremony, deleted the number of the cousin who forwarded me Jolene's spiteful status update. It felt like sweeping dust out the door, not slamming it shut. I started small. A new coffee shop tucked away in a neighborhood I'd barely explored. A new journal, the pages crisp and waiting. Mornings spent walking without checking my phone every 5 minutes. Nothing monumental. Everything monumental. One afternoon, I sat alone on a bench at Discovery Green, the wind tossing dry leaves across the empty stretch of grass. Children's laughter echoed distantly from a playground, and the golden sun slanted low across the city skyline. I watched the leaves dance, and for the first time I smiled. Not because the ache was gone, but because I had stopped waiting for someone else to fix it. Somewhere deep inside, questions still stirred. Would they ever change? Would I ever let them back in if they did? The answers didn't feel urgent anymore. Some doors, I realized, are better left closed. I closed my journal and stood, feeling the brisk wind tug at the hem of my coat. Ahead of me, the sidewalk stretched wide and open, curving gently out of sight. I took a step forward, not with certainty, but with peace. Looking back, I realize healing doesn't always come wrapped in forgiveness or tied neatly with closure. Sometimes, healing is simply walking away, without explanations, without permission, choosing yourself even when no one else will. If there's one thing this journey taught me, it's that your value isn't determined by the seats you're assigned at someone else's table. It's in the space you carve out for yourself, even when you're forced to sit alone. What about you? Have you ever felt invisible among people who were supposed to love you the most? I'd love to hear your story. Drop a comment below. If this video resonated with you, type 1" or share where you're watching from. And if you believe in building strength through stories, please hit that subscribe button. Your voice, your journey, your healing, they all matter here. Let's walk this path together. Thank you for being part of this moment. I'll see you in the next story.